Hi, welcome everybody to the talk tonight with Melina Laboucan-Massimo on community-based solar and energy sovereignty. Delighted that you could join us this evening. My name is Am Johal. I'm director of SFU's Vancity Office of Community Engagement. I wanted to begin by acknowledging that we're on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. I'd like to introduce Cease Weiss, who will welcome us here.
I was like, I hope there's stairs. I just thought you climbed up with your long legs. I was just telling Am I thought I'd have to live the shirt I'm wearing tonight, which is Wonder Woman, and jump up. Wonder Woman. So speaking of Wonder Woman, here's a beautiful Wonder Woman that we're going to welcome tonight. A dear friend and a superheroine in my eyes. So just want to start by bringing us all into in Chopmoth, one heart, one mind, and just to have a good feeling for tonight and to see what the better possibilities are for us in this world. We're all partaking in killing the earth ourselves, whether we like it or not, by driving, by heating our homes in the ways we do, etc. So, I don't know, it's really great when we are inspired by people that, have really made those changes and go out and help educate how to bring those changes into our communities. So, I'm going to share a song that I just composed with two other women a couple of weeks ago in a performance piece with the Grunt Gallery. And one of the women is Ursula Johnson, who's a Mi'kmaq artist who composes songs literally with the shape of the land, meaning she looks at maps and thinks, okay, the land goes like this, and then the water goes down and comes up. So the song really emanates the tones of the communities here. And it represents the Tsleil-Waututh community and the Squamish community. And although our participant from Musqueam couldn't make it, it still reflects their community too. But most importantly, the song is about the pollinators, and that's why it was really special to me to bring this song out. Because one of the reasons we're looking at energy changes is, we don't just need a better way of living, we need to protect those sacred creatures that live out there. So this song is for the pollinators. I'm going to be singing about the bees and the butterflies and the birds, specifically the hummingbird. So, Haichka, Osiam, Anhath, Squalowin, and Trukmahat, Toitstanat, Queen Snas. My traditional name is Toitstanat. I'm from the Squamish and Stalo peoples. And it lifts my heart to share this good work with you. Haichka Osiam. Touch, touch, nays, touch, touch, nays. Oh, he, do, oh, he, do. Kelela. Say Haichka Osiam Anhat Squalowins. Welcome, Melina. Welcome. You're always welcome in these territories. Haichka Osiam Anhat.
Thank you, Cease, for that wonderful, warm welcome. I also wanted to thank the SFU's Institute for the Humanities and SFU's Office of Aboriginal Peoples for partnering on the talk this evening. Really excited to have Melina here at SFU. She's spoken at a number of conferences, including an anti-mining conference in late March of last year. She's been a panelist at SFU on a number of occasions, and it's great to have her unique voice on the issues here in Vancouver, where she's also lived previously as well. She's Laboucan-Cree from Northern Alberta. She's worked on social, environmental, and climate justice issues for the past 15 years. She studied and worked in Brazil, Australia, Mexico, and Canada, focusing on resource extraction, media literacy, Indigenous rights and responsibilities. She's produced short documentaries, researched and worked on topics ranging from the tar sands, land protection, water issues, cultural appropriation. For the past 9 years, Melina has worked against tar sands expansion as a climate and energy campaigner with Greenpeace in Alberta, as well as with the Indigenous Environmental Network internationally. So please join me in welcoming Melina.
Tensegwakia, Nia Melina Miowapan Laboucan-Massimo ni hinihiao kineskumtanawao. It's an honor and privilege to be here on Coast Salish territory, unceded Coast Salish territory, and thank you so much, Cease, to welcome me here. It's so nice and so lovely to have you here. I haven't seen you for a while, but have known you for so many years, and you're such an amazing community organizer and beloved to many people in the community. So very honored that. Thank you so much for coming here. And I know you're very busy, so thank you so much. Especially her daughter just had a baby, so yeah, she's a grandmother now. So hi, thank you. So I'm going to show a PowerPoint, a lot of pictures, to kind of give you an idea of back home. I come from the Alberta tar sands. Who's heard of the Alberta tar sands? Yeah, okay, so we've done a little bit of our work. When I started about 10 years ago, a lot of people didn't know what the tar sands was. They said tar sands and Jane, like the movie Tar Sands. When I was like, what do you work on? I was like, tar sands issues? And they're like, what? So it's really great, especially out here in Coast Salish territory because of the Kinder Morgan pipeline. I know there's a lot of awareness that's happened. And then we started in the Keystone XL, and I'll talk a bit more about some of the pipeline campaign work, but I also want to acknowledge, I heard that we have some people from Chicago in the house tonight, so thank you for coming to the talk. It's really always important to talk cross-border to, because a lot of the product from our homelands comes to, to your guys' south of the border, to our global addiction to oil. So really happy that you guys are here too, and everyone. So just to take you a little bit back to kind of to give a location of where I'm from and where I was born. I was born in northern Alberta, which is in the Peace River region, and so I come from a small Cree community. That's my Cookham, actually, before she passed away, and that's actually my dad up there, and he was a small child. He was actually hidden from the Indian agents and from residential school, so the Indian agents would come into the community every fall and would take the children. And my grandparents realized, as my older aunts and uncles, his siblings, were taken, they realized how horribly these schools were and how abusive they were. So when he was born, they hid him until about age 9, and then he started learning English at the age of 10. So he was brought up in the bush. Yeah, that's the boreal forest. It's very beautiful, and it's one of the largest carbon sinks in the world. It holds a lot of carbon, and I'll explain more about that. So we're on the west side in the Peace River region where I was born, and then you can see the other places. So for American folks, the area that in all those areas, that's 23% of the province of Alberta. It's actually the size of Florida, the state of Florida. So we're talking about destroying, a big entire state in America. Or for folks that have been to the UK, the England and Wales combined. So a really huge landmass, 141,000 square kilometers. To give you an idea of like the microcosm of the macrocosm, so this is one community where I'm from. Little Buffalo is where my family lives. This is the teardrop, and so you can see here how the land has already been slated out for quote-unquote development, and that 70% has already been leased out. So you can see all of the different oil and gas wells, and 1,400 square kilometers of leases have been granted in our territory. And so this is happening to not only my community, but to many communities in northern Alberta. So you can see we have a lot of issues, and I think what really politicized me as a young person is seeing how my family lived and how I was, where we didn't have running water, there's no paved roads, there's no a lot of community, there's very little, even now, very little community infrastructure, and yet there was billions of dollars that were coming out in revenue and leaving the community but not coming back into the community. So when I moved to the city, and as a teenager, I was like, wow, they have so much resources here in Edmonton. There's swimming pools, they have libraries, they have paved roads, they have running water. So it was really politicized me because, so much money and so much revenue has been taken out of our territory, but a lot of the resources don't go back. And so, this is one of the biggest. We already have conventional oil and gas, fracking, logging, but now we have tar sands. And so tar sands is very heavy, and so I won't go too much into this because I feel people have an understanding, but it's clay, silt, sand, and so that's why it's so water intensive and energy intensive to extract, because it's not fluid like conventional oil. It is solid mass, and so it takes a lot to extract the 11 to 18% of the bitumen and the tar sands that exists in most of the land. So they're moving, you can see here, this is a flyover we did, so you can see the yellow is on the bottom there, those two right there. Those are the largest dump trucks in the world. So they're actually like as big as this, like as taller than this room. They're 3 stories high, and their wheels alone are huge and very expensive. And then we also have the underground kind of like fracking, the underground mining, which is actually 80% of the way they'll recover tar sands, which is also, very intensive on energy and water. And why is this such a big issue is because especially what we'll see in the future is not only oil crisis, what we're in, but water crisis. I just came from California doing mentorship work with youth from Standing Rock, and they have 2.5 years left of water. And we're right now in north of the medicine line, north of the border, we have a sixth of Canada's freshwater supply existing within this inland delta, which is one of the largest in the world. And it's called the Peace Athabasca Delta, or the Mackenzie River Basin, because it connects the Peace River to the Athabasca River and flows north to the Mackenzie. And this is actually being drained right now, and it's pristine water from Athabasca Glacier, for example, and you can see with climate change it's receding, and so we're draining this pristine water and then also contaminating, which I'll show you pictures of. And so we're using at least 3 to 5 barrels to produce 1 barrel of oil of water. And then you can see right here, this is another flyover we did. This is actually a tailing pond. So this is actually a toxic sludge lake. This isn't actually a lake or a river. It looks like it because you can see the sky reflecting off of the tailing pond, but this is what it actually looks like when you zoom in. So you can actually see it looks like an oil spill on land, and you can see the little bird guys. They're called bitumen, which is the technical term of tar sands. It's kind of like a scarecrow in the tar sands to try to get the birds not to land, but the birds do land and perish. So you can see we're actually producing a lot of byproduct from these tailing ponds. And that's 180 square kilometers. Or actually, there's more now. It's probably about over 200 square kilometers of just toxic sludge that sits on the landscape that's contaminating and leaching into the waterways. And it's really important to a lot of folks downstream, like in Fort Chipewyan, and I worked with the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation for many years, and they're northeast and our community is northwest, and we're fishing people, but they're like extreme fishing people, like that's what they live on all year. And you can see here one of the fishers, and there's been studies done where you can see the twisted spines and the pus and the tumors on the fish. So back to the boreal and just talking about one of the largest terrestrial carbon sinks. So So basically, who knows that Canada's now number one in deforestation in the world, past the Amazon? Who knew that? So one person, so that was like a blip on 2 years ago, I think, or maybe 3 now. It was on like the Huffington Post and things like that, where we're now number one in deforestation because we're deforesting the tar sands region so quickly to get at the oil below, because you have to go through the boreal forest, which is an ancient old growth forest, to get to the tar sands. So you can see it's actually causing, oh, sorry about that. It's causing extreme extinctions, actually. And so the woodland caribou, which a lot of Indigenous people subsist on, it will be extinct by 2040. So within our lifetime, locally extirpated. So that means because they're having such a hard time being able to access their natural habitat, they're going to be extinct. So, and also migratory songbirds, unfortunately, we're in a migration path from South America to North America. And so like the whooping crane and other birds are also being impacted. And so just to give you an example of a lot of the companies, they'll say, everything's going to be fine, this is the before and after. So this is what a woodland fen looks like. I got this actually from a researcher that researched for companies. And this is the after. So this is what the companies are saying, you'll have equivalent land use capacity is their technical term. Whereas, for us as Indigenous peoples, we know that we can't pick berries, pick medicines, this land is contaminated. And they only have to replace legally 3 species out of the 10 that they destroy, plant species and vegetation. So you can see here too, this is actually taken from outer space. So this is a satellite image, and you can see all the lakes in the bottom, but you can see actually at the top, those are actually the tailing ponds. So the toxic sludge lakes, those you can see from space. So this is, there's the Highway 63, they call the Highway of Death, because it's so scary, because there's so much heavy industry and people are kind of playing chicken on the roads, because most of it's a one-way highway. And you can see the communities there. And so the reason why I'm talking about the extinction is this is what the impact would look like with the underground mining. So it's underground or SAGD, steam assisted gravity drainage, where the underground mining just basically completely fragments the boreal, or you have the mines which could just completely decimate the boreal. So that's why a lot of the animals can't actually get through all of these kind of pipelines, cut lines, all the different things that they're struggling with. And so you can see here, we took this picture, we were standing on top of this, and they just you can see a mine behind, and we just kind of drove in. We're not really supposed to do this, but we drove in, and it's just dead trees. They took down so many trees that they're just sitting there, because they can't put them on the market, because some aren't good for pulp and paper. And that's what they call overburden. So overburden is basically the boreal. And so you can see how much has been, I really like this quote, because you can see since operations began in the late 60s, early 70s, tar sands extractors have moved more than 1.4 billion tons of what industry calls overburden. I'm sure it's more now. This is actually more dirt, more earth than was removed for the Great Wall of China, the Suez Canal, the Great Pyramid of Cheops, and the 10 largest dams in the world combined. So that's how much land we're moving, because they basically have to mine 2 tons to 4 tons of a back dump truck to get at a couple of barrels of tar sands. Synthetic crude to make. And so you can see the woodland caribou and being impacted, the lynx, the migratory songbirds, and so I'm going to go into the renewable energy soon, but this is actually the reason why I wanted to actually put up solar in my home community, because this happened 5 years ago, and it was right beside where my family lives. And it was one of the biggest oil spills in Alberta and Canada's history, and nobody told my family about it, and they just basically let the community decide what their emergency response plan was, which was nothing, because people hadn't been that close to an oil spill before. Basically the fumes were wafting over to the community. And the way that I found out about it is because my auntie, who's taught Cree in the community for 30 years, was texting me, because she knows the work that I do. And she was like, okay, so we can't breathe, our eyes are burning, we have stomach aches, we feel like throwing up. We took the kids into the community, outside of the school into the field, and it's worse actually outside. We thought it was a propane leak in the school, but it's apparently not. Do you know what it is? And I was like, well, I'll look it up, but nothing was mentioned anywhere except for what I found on a business website was alerting the industry only of that there had been an oil spill. But they only at that point had said, a couple hundred barrels, but it was actually thousands and thousands of barrels, 28,000 barrels actually, 5.4 million liters. And so it was really traumatizing to see how the government refused and the company refused to inform the community. And only 5 days after the spill, the government at the time was Harper. They emailed, well, it was the Alberta government, but they emailed, it was after the Harper election, the day after they finally released the information to the community. And they were like, oh, FYI, you're beside one of the biggest oil spills in Alberta's history. And that's all they informed the community. They didn't tell pregnant women to leave. They didn't tell, people with small children, for elders that have already respiratory, issues. So we were able to finally secure a helicopter. I had many people hang up on me because they didn't want us to fly over to show what had happened. So this is actually a flyover, and the little white folks, those are people. They're in hazmat suits, and you can see here. That is actually the boreal forest, and this is actually in early spring, so this is April 29th, and so that's the oil that is seeping all through what we call in our language muskeg, which is where a lot of the medicines grow, and like rat root or things that are like really good immune boosters. And you can see it's usually green, but because of the melt off and everything after winter, it hasn't gotten green yet. But this is like basically completely destroyed, and it completely consumed beaver dams as well. And so we alerted the media, and media actually came. They drove 10 hours, which takes 10 hours there and back from the city because it was one of the biggest spills. And, if you guys want to see more, because I'm going to move on from this topic, but online on YouTube, if you want to show friends or family, it's called Oil on Laboucan Land, and it's on YouTube. So you can easily access that, and a lot of teachers and people use it for kind of an educational resource, so it kind of goes into more depth about tar sands and this oil spill. And then this is after, so this is 15 months after the spill. The company said they had cleaned up, and then we went back, and this is what we found was just basically like a dead zone, and we were pulling out oil gook or gunk or whatever you want to. The technical term is oil gunk, but so yes, that's what I say. So yeah, but it was a dead zone, and so basically, a lot of our elders say if there's little bugs and all the flying things, it means that it's healthy, right? This it's healthy, and this was just silence. It was just nothing was living. And we saw this is where people hunt, and we saw footprints from wolves, and yeah, it was just I really hope that they weren't drinking from this, because sometimes elders were telling me about how the petroleum is salty. So sometimes a lot of animals to replenish themselves is they go to salt licks. They'll lick kind of big boulders of rocks to get the salt. And sometimes the elders saw the animals licking the ends of end pipes because it's petroleum, it's salty. So that's kind of my dad, who's a hunter. He found 3 tumors in the carcass of a moose and yellow meat because I grew up on moose meat, and that's a really healthy country food, and that's the kind of way that their bodies are being impacted by eating the vegetation or maybe drinking from contaminated sites. So that's another view. And so for folks out here on the West Coast or, from other communities, there are lots of communities impacted by explosions and oil spills. And so, yeah, this is one of the explosions that Total, a French company, this is 300-meter crater. And so that's from the air, and so you can see close up. This was an explosion from the underground mining that the casing that wasn't done well, and you're pushing superheated steam into the Earth's core and pushing it far down, and it everyone knows hot air rises, so it wanted to come out, and it exploded. And this is right beside a community of Fort McKay First Nation, which is another Cree community in the Athabasca region. So it's really scary. It's all melted earth and an explosion. This is a natural gas pipeline explosion. And just to connect it to the fracking issue, we're utilizing, this is probably more now because this is from a journalist, Andrew Nikiforuk, who's studied 20 years of oil and gas and business journalist, and he calculated that 6 million homes. So every day we use enough natural gas to power the tar sands. To extract tar sands, we have to use natural gas, and so we're using natural gas, which comes from fracking, which comes from LNG, and so in northern BC, a lot of the pipelines will want to go that way to power the tar sands. And to end this section, I think one of the things I think a lot of people are concerned about, obviously, is climate change and, the climate chaos. So the reason why, for folks that don't know already, I'm sure most of you know the reason why the Canadian government can't meet its climate negotiation or the climate agreements that they've made in the international negotiations is because of the tar sands, because it's the fastest growing source of greenhouse gas emissions in Canada. So it's really irresponsible, in my opinion, for us to produce, exorbitant amounts of greenhouse gas emissions when we have people dying around the world being made climate refugees because of fossil fuel extraction, which is producing climate change. And the last slide for this is just all the pipelines. So for folks this is what we call Turtle Island, so North America, and we can see all the different pipeline routes that need to exist to kind of support tar sands extraction, and all the different cancer clusters or refinery communities that are impacted in the north and south. And you can see the tankers here on the west coast if they get the Gateway or the Kinder Morgan through. Gateway will hopefully will be turned down this week actually, but Kinder Morgan might not be, which is another tar sands pipeline. And so from the oil spill, I thought, I had at that point had been doing a number of years of campaigning and talking about this and going to community, going internationally, and was just like, seeing my family being basically impacted so immensely. I was just like, what am I doing? Why, if I can go around the world and try to raise awareness and try to stop the resources and the extraction happening or stop the financing into our territories, but yet my family lives this daily reality of being basically completely surrounded by oil sands operations, then that, what am I doing? Because I felt like if I can't change things at home immediately, then I don't really think that my family should have to wait for 30 years till finally tar sands extraction stops. So that's why I decided to start fundraising and put up a solar project. And this happened last summer. But it happened for a number of years. I had to kind of research and learn about how to do solar implementation, and I'm going to explain a little bit about what that looks like. So hopefully, maybe you'll do it in your communities at some point. And so, what does enabling community-based energy projects look like? And, it is about communities envisioning what they want to see in the future. And I took a lot of inspiration from this. Who's heard of the Souk First Nation on Vancouver Island? Okay, yeah, so this is at the time, so that's Chief Gordon Planis, and he had one of the biggest solar panels in all of Canada and for his nation, and they actually have 2 electric cars now that they rent out to community members. They have solar paneled fisheries building, community center, and administration building, and now they have 3 greenhouses for wasabi, so they're actually like figuring out ways to do community gardening. And so you can see there's a lot of these catchwords that are called, zero waste communities, but if you really think about it, Indigenous communities have always been zero waste communities. And so it's great that, the rest of the world is hopefully catching up, and hopefully our communities can return to that as well. So greenhouses, hopefully the next phase. But I think it's really important too to point out that from an Indigenous perspective, a lot of the renewable energy technology is actually a lot more in line with our way of being and thinking, and because it's not extractive, it's like regenerative energy. And so I think it makes a lot more sense, and that's why in a lot of Indigenous communities actually want to see this type of technology really coming to fruition. And so you can see here, this is one of we had about 2 weeks we trained youth from the community, and that's Darren over there, Carlton, Shane, and so we put up these panels. You can see our crew, we were we did a top of pole mount system, so you can see the poles we actually engineered from an oil sands company that we bought these steel poles and then just basically refurbished them to make them hold solar panels, which is kind of cool. And so this is Carlton, and he's in the video that I'm going to show you at the end. It's a short video to kind of give you more of the voice of the community, because I'm just one person. And so this was really exciting. We were super happy because this is the first day ever solar panels came to the community. And my auntie who came to our solar feast, she's in her 70s, and she was came up to me and she's this tall. And she's like, oh, I never thought I'd see solar panels ever in my life. I never thought I'd see them in our community. I was just seeing them on TV. So she was real happy, to see them actually in our community. So you can see here what we did with those poles is that we just ended up like kind of sanding them down and then kind of fitting them to hold the panels and then like painting them. And that's the final product. So this is 80 panels, a 20.8 kilowatt system, and it powers the health center, which is on the right, and you can see the community school in the back, which is where all the kids in the community go from kindergarten to grade 12. So that means every day these children and students are going to see solar panels generating power for our community. And I think that for me is probably the best reward because I'm not there every day. I'm still doing this type of work, and I've gone in to do solar workshops after with the, different ages. And the grade 5 and 6, after this, because we put this up in August, so we had a feast and we did a ribbon cutting ceremony, but I came back later that fall, and you could tell the grade 5s and 6 had thought about it. They were like, put it like literally the whole, like, I don't know, like 20 or 30 kids, they were like, no, me. They're like, okay, so what happens when the sun doesn't shine? And they're like, and then what happens if a solar panel breaks? And so you could see them actually thinking about what solar energy was and what it meant to the community. And so that means these young children will understand and know that solar technology can provide energy for us. And I think that for me is the best thing, because what we're completely surrounded by is oil and gas. And that is what basically students are made to go into those trades that, like, you're not made to, but that's their only choice. If they want to stay in the community, they have to work for oil and gas. That's why I don't live in the community, because I left to get a quote-unquote better education so I could, educate myself to go back and not, have to make a difference and to try to, like, change the way that this isn't, the oil spill isn't the way that I want to see the future. The oil spill is something of the past, and I want to see this in the future. And so this is the kids. We had like a solar feast, and you can see the kids like putting their handprints in, and we're going to do a community garden next year to go underneath. And also I'll show you this video. It's called Solar in the Tar Sands. And some of the points, like, I won't go into too much, but we really wanted to reduce our dependency on fossil fuels and show First Nations that we can honor the land and our sacred connection to it. Also, another thing is that there's crippling energy costs for northern communities. I don't know if for here it's kind of cheaper because you have BC Hydro, but for us we have diesel and propane. And that's like hundreds and thousands of dollars every year we're paying for heating our homes and everything. This is really expensive, and it's also very greenhouse gas intensive. So this is basically the ribbon cutting ceremony. We had a drone on site, and we took a picture from up top, so you can see how tall the panels are and how big they are. And it was a really exciting day. And I think one of the points that I really think is important to make about the idea of what a just transition is, there's these catchwords, and there's a lot of talk about what is a just transition. And this term was coined by the union movement, like the Blue Alliance, like the Green Blue Alliances that out of the States, of like talking about transitioning workers from oil-dependent jobs to renewable energy jobs. And also, I would really push to expand that term of what a just transition it means to actually include communities that are first and foremost impacted by resource extraction and have experienced the brunt of this for the past 30 years to actually receive this type of technology first in line, because they've had to really experience and have the burden of contaminated water, air, land destruction, communities completely being torn apart and ripped at the seams because of this, I could go on to story and story of how detrimental this industry has been in our communities. And so, this is why a lot of Indigenous communities have been doing frontline resistance, and what we've done in the tar sands was organize a lot of rallies and prayer walks. We did prayer walk for 5 years where we walked in destruction zones and prayed and hundreds of people came and joined us throughout the years. We called it the Tar Sands Healing Walk. And one of the last points that I want to show you before the video is talking about the violence and why violence that exists against women and why violence that exists on the land is actually interconnected and linked and very fundamentally linked. And they're not really separable. And a lot of people sometimes think like, okay, well, this is a violence issue, this is a social justice issue, this is an environmental justice issue, this is a climate justice, but they're actually all linked because of the, there's a lot of patriarchy and capitalism that actually exploits the land and actually exploits Indigenous women, especially when oil sands workers or, fracking LNG. We've seen it in the Dakotas. We've seen it in the north in BC. A study just came out by Amnesty International that connected the violence in resource extraction to the violence that women are experiencing on their bodies. And so I wanted to make these points because a lot of us now have heard about the issue of murdered and missing women. And, a lot of these women are leaving their communities to go get an education, to go to urban centers, to learn and to kind of like follow whatever dreams that they have. And when they do that, they're actually very vulnerable in our society because Indigenous women's lives are not as valued. It's also, Amnesty also did another study where Indigenous women are 5 times to 7 times more likely to die a violent death in the society. And I think that's something that, we're slowly starting to talk about it, but it's something that our communities have known for, 3 decades. And that's why here on the downtown east side, a lot of us have, for me, it's only been 10 years that I've done the walks, but they've been happening for 20 years to raise awareness about violence against Indigenous women and murdered and missing women. And the reason why I've incorporated this more into my talks now is because that's actually my little sister. She died at the age of 25. And she was found dead in Toronto because she went there to finish college, and she graduated 3 months before she was found dead. And the reason why I bring these issues up as well is because it's not actually really easy to talk about, and I try not to all the time. But I think it's really important for all people in this society to understand the impacts on our families so they know how to support our families in better ways. Because a lot of people like my family, her case is still unsolved, and we've been pushing for 3 years, some families for 20, for justice for their family members. And it's very draining because we're already trying to protect their land, trying to protect the water, trying to make sure that everybody has clean air, and then we're also trying to protect our women or find justice for our women that have been murdered and missing. And another reason why I talk about it is because the impact it has on our culture and the links between when women go missing or are found dead is that my sister Bella, she was actually a cultural carrier in our family, right? That was the position and the role that she took within our family. So here she is learning how to make hides so she can make moccasins for our family, so she can make, she learned how to do beading and tuffing and all the different artwork that my grandmother did, that my aunties did. And so this was a part of her role, and my role was to protect the land. Her role was to make beautiful things, and that's what she went to school for, was the fashion arts. And I think it's important, like every day, this is a daily reality of just this year, actually. Before it was 500, then it went up to 1,200, the government was admitting, and now it's actually 4,000. So, and this was the Minister of the Status of Women that said this in the New York Times earlier this year when I was speaking at the Lincoln Center. The New York Times covered MMIW for the first time. And she talked about actually how there's 4,000 women. So it's not just, a couple hundred cases. This is like an epidemic, and that's why finally there is an inquiry happening in this country. And it really tears families apart. Bella was a very loved person in our family, and she created it left a big void in our family. So that's kind of a harsh way to end it. So I'm actually going to show you guys a video about the solar project, but I just wanted to, because I actually had a bit more time in this talk, I try to present that. Like I was at Harvard this year speaking, and I talked about MMIW because a lot of times in America people don't know about that type of issue and connecting how interconnected these issues actually are. And so But I'm going to show you a video about our solar project, and you can also actually access the video on Laboucan Solar as well, or you can follow us on Facebook. It's Laboucan Solar, and you can see the video there. But I'm going to show you guys it right now, and feel free to share it with your friends and family too, whenever you so choose. Here we go.
The Laboucan Cree have been here since time immemorial. Indigenous peoples have a very intimate connection with our homelands here in northern Alberta. And what we've seen instead is industry coming and essentially taking over our lands and really exploiting them, and it's had a detrimental impact. We see companies digging down into the earth, trying to extract the very last drop of oil. But instead, we can start looking up. We're bathing in sunlight all around us, and yet we don't utilize that energy. And so that's why our community has decided to install solar. Pretty amazing to see this project go up. A lot of the community members and the young people are working, they're getting hands-on training right now. It's really amazing to see how proud people are of it and how it's a community project, because all of this has been through the blood, sweat, and tears of the community.
Well, this project matters to us because it kind of represents who we are and where we're going in the future. When you see the work, I can say that I did that. Took part and I did it right. So there'll be a lot of people seeing it every day. I can tell people I worked on this.
I know in a lot of the ceremonies and the songs, the sun is praised. Even the project name, Bita Pan, means the coming of the dawn, and it's coming of a new era. Era where we use, energy that's not devastating to our environment. In getting this solar project going, we are leaders in solar power, and that's what we're teaching our youth. They have to learn how to operate it, they have to learn how to maintain it, and they already know how to set it up. So if any of our neighbors in the surrounding First Nations or Métis settlements want to start a solar power, we can be there to help them get it going.
So thank you for listening.
We've got about 20 minutes or so for questions and conversation. So if anyone has anything they would like to ask or any comment, just let us know. We'll bring the microphone around. Sir?
Hey. Can you talk a little bit, Melina, about the Laboucan land use or land claim negotiations a little bit, and about the history of that? And I'm wondering to what regard the solar panels have affected that process in any way. If you think they've put any kind of pressure in any direction, or I don't know.
Yeah, totally. So I guess I'll answer the first part first and the second, that part first. But I think in certain ways, luckily, it's been more, I think, the change of government that's been helpful at this point in time. We have the Trudeau government, which, in my opinion, doesn't necessarily reflect all the words. They say a lot of great words, but the action doesn't necessarily reflect that. So we have yet to see, but they do seem more supportive in helping with solar in communities, especially hopefully in ours, but that won't be the case. We don't know yet. But just so people can see back there. But the Alberta government as well has had a changeover. This is political stuff that people not from Canada won't know, but just we've had a changeover from right-wing government to a left-wing government, left of center, I would say. But they are more supportive as well. Like, we didn't actually get funding. I didn't take government funding. Well, we didn't get government funding because there wasn't any available, and we didn't take corporate funding because I just won't take that type of money because I don't think it's, it's greenwashing essentially. And so I think that they're more willing to talk to us about solar and pushing next phases of solar, but that wouldn't have happened with a conservative government, and they weren't really willing to talk to us in the past. But that being said, with a land negotiation, that's a completely different ballgame, because so for folks that don't know, as you can see, we're from a very northern community, and so we actually never signed treaty. And so we reside within Treaty 8, but we actually never, as Laboucan people, never signed treaty because the land surveyors and the land people that were trying to, go from community to community to get people to sign Treaty 8, which is the region we're in, couldn't find our family because we're so far in, and because they actually didn't have a paved road until I was born. So it was really difficult to find our people, our families. And so with that, we've never signed treaty, and so it's been like this long 70, 50, and like really like the past 30 years, a really intense negotiation of just really subpar offerings from the Alberta government and Canadian government to, well, more the Canadian government because it's a federal issue, but for us to sign on to treaty. And so with that, it's still not signed, and the community walked away from negotiations years ago, and then now it's been resumed again, and so potentially there might be a signing of treaty, but we have yet to see what will happen, because a lot of times the government really in my opinion, lowballs communities. And so this land that we are completely, surrounded by, it's, like I said, $14 billion of revenue from resources don't go to the community. So the amount that they offer a lot of times is so low compared to what that land is, quote unquote, actually worth. And it's hard because as an Indigenous person, I don't really believe in land ownership. So it's hard because our communities are forced to basically bargain for our own land. And that's not a part of our teachings, but because we want to protect our land, we need to figure out ways to have ways to mitigate the impacts and also protect the land. But we can't really do that if we're not landowners in the Western society. And so it's this really weird process, in my opinion. And I mean, I'm impartial. Maybe some people, I know there's people on the West Coast that have signed treaty, but I mean, if I had it my way, I wouldn't necessarily sign treaty, but at the same time, we need to figure out a way to protect our land, because into the future, if we can't basically, and I won't go on too much, but the reason with this is because we have Indigenous peoples in Canada have constitutional rights under Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution, and so within that, and also there's been precedent-setting court cases like this in the Supreme Court that have been done where they've had to basically, the government has been forced to do duty to consult. And so when we're not basically owners in our own land, sometimes the government doesn't have to consult with us in certain ways. And so, say for instance, TransCanada was able to build a jumbo natural gas pipeline in 2009 across our traditional territory without the consent of the community. And so they get away with things like this all the time. So having more land rights would be beneficial, but it's just a really difficult situation because they haven't been basically signed. So, but what hopefully would be in the future with a community plan would be implementing more solar into the community plan if we do sign treaty, and that's one thing that the nation is looking at. So hopefully we would have more solar in our community. I would hope that it doesn't depend on a land claim agreement for me, but at the same time, a part of the issue is, from my understanding and my studying of solar, is that it's really hard to there's jurisdictional issues if you're putting up a solar farm. If you don't have a land place to put it, then you can actually, you can't put up a solar farm. And so if our nation actually wants to take a next step in implementing of solar, we have to figure out the jurisdictional land issue. Otherwise, we won't get the permitting in place to actually put up a solar project. So the project that we put up, I didn't ask for a permit. because that's in our territory, and I didn't really give two Fs. But at the same time, and they came up to me like, you didn't get a permit for this? And I was like, no, and I'm not going to. And I was like, they can come and tell me to take this project down. But for a huge solar farm, that's going to be very different, because we're basically going to have to be, no, I wouldn't say hopefully it won't get to this point, but with utilities, it's going to be a different game. So I hope that answers some of your question.
How much, just to power, say, Little Buffalo, how much land base would you need for an adequate field of solar power?
To be honest, to make it financially viable, it should be above 5 megawatts. And so if you actually want to because we're going to actually have to get outside funding for this. I did internal funding. So I did foundation funding, Bullfrog Power, and Jane Fonda gave me money. So it was like rando, like putting together, trying to get this project up. So it was very like kind of grassroots, right? But with a huge solar farm, you actually have to get investors, and so that's going to be a whole complicated thing in itself. And so to get investment, a lot of times they won't invest in something smaller than 5 megawatts. But the policy actually doesn't exist within Alberta right now at this point. It exists for 1 megawatt and under. And so ours is 20.8 kilowatts. So it's a small project relatively, but under 1 megawatt, and the microgeneration application in Alberta is under 1 meg. But if you want to go bigger, that actually policy doesn't exist yet in Alberta. And so that's why right now I'm actually in meetings with the Alberta government to tell them, like, please implement solar policy that actually benefits communities, so communities can own their solar projects. Because right now is what they're going to be doing is opening up the market to outside developers from outside of the country. And so the first phase will be actually outside developers in Suncor and like all the utilities, and it's not going to be community owned. And that's a problem. And so the next phase, hopefully, we'll be able to get enough funding to get a pre-feasibility and a business plan together so we can actually implement utility scale solar. But it's really difficult for communities to do that if policy doesn't exist that actually supports and protects communities from developers.
Just want to say miigwech and hi. I'm sorry if I said it.
Hi. Yep.
Hi.
Thank you.
It's more of a comment. The point that you're making, connecting patriarchy and MMIW to how we treat the earth, I think really needs to kind of be more highlighted in all of these discussions. I know a lot of environmentalists, we have our hearts in the right places, but we forget, or even connecting to the just transition with workers' rights, how interconnected all of these problems are and how systemic it comes from. Things like misogyny and patriarchy, you can see how our structures, our institutions that have power, we have the same feeling towards the earth as how we treat our women in society. So I just wanted to really thank you for highlighting that. I know I got to hear you speak, I think it was Monday, at, where were we at? We were somewhere on Monday and you didn't get to...
The uniform.
Yeah, uniform, and we didn't get to hear that part of your speech, but I would encourage you to continue doing that, and thank you for sharing that with us. I know it takes a lot, just thank you.
Thank you. Come on, I'm sure you got some questions. Just joking.
So you talked a little bit about this already, about like some obstacles that were present in getting the solar panels in, with like land use and like laws. Were there any other obstacles that you came across?
Yeah, a lot of the people that delivered the solar panels couldn't find our reserve, or lack of reserve, because they're like, we actually had an address and you could find it on Google Maps, but it was like really difficult to get a lot of, so we actually had to, so some of the racking for that you put on solar panels came from Kelowna, and so then it got to Kelowna to Calgary to Edmonton, and then once it got to Edmonton, they're like, we don't know where to bring them because your reserve is too far north, and like so things like that, where it was just like, logistically speaking, I would say if you're going to build big projects in small communities, there's a lot of things where like we didn't have the right tool, so someone had to drive like 2 hours, or we didn't, things like that, where you have to really plan for it. And because it was my first project that I put up, I think I definitely noticed a lot of I actually had a challenge, or learnings and challenges slide in a different presentation, but there's that was the challenge. And then also funding is a challenge for future communities. A lot of communities have asked me to put up projects, but it's like it just takes a lot of time to fundraise. And now, luckily, the Alberta government, and I know this doesn't exist in BC here, but the Alberta government actually is putting funding towards Indigenous community-owned solar, but small scale, so like under 1 megawatt and up to 200,000 and only 60% of the project. So there's funding is an issue, but the benefits are training local community members is like the major benefit, but it's trying to find people that know how to work with Indigenous communities or small communities. And so we had a little bit of some hiccups, but in the end we were able to get the training that we needed for the community to put up the project.
Hello.
Hi.
Can you explain a little bit more why they're keeping you guys at 1 megawatt? And what is like the politics? Is it just that they don't want you guys to become competitive on any level?
I think before this policy existed before the NDP government, so it's actually just been policy that's, if in my opinion, seems quite arbitrary. But 1 megawatt does kind of limit the ability to compete against other utilities. So there's already. In Alberta, we have a privatized market, so we actually have different utilities across the province in different regions that compete against each other and exist and kind of are like the BC Hydro of like that area. But right now they might be pushing it to 5 megawatts, but I don't think they'll bring it over 5 megawatts, which might be a problem if people actually want to put up bigger, large-scale solar. But yeah, I mean, it is going to be an issue. I would say, like, for me, what I've noticed and experienced a little bit, not even enough yet, but I'm sure I will, was that the oil companies of tomorrow will probably be the utility companies, because they are the next ones on the list to lose potential power to the energy grid. And if communities own energy, then that means that there would be potentially a creation of an energy democracy or a decentralization of energy, and that empowers communities to own their own power and to produce their own power and to not have to pay the high rates of energy. But those utility companies won't want to give up that power. So that's going to be a part of that policy that is trying to be pushed in Alberta. And so there's a lot of outside people, like, say, the Canadian Association of Solar Industries in CanSIA, they're for short, in Ontario, that's actually pushing the Alberta government to try to raise it from 1 megawatt to 5 megawatts. But we really had, that won't happen until next year, from my understanding, with the Alberta government. They'll actually change the policy then, but we don't know yet. They wouldn't confirm with me, but they're looking at maybe 5. So hopefully that would help Bennett a little bit, but I think it needs to be more.
I'll speak again. Yeah, like what you're saying about green capitalism in a way, like just because it's sustainable, if it still benefits the 1%, it doesn't benefit the rest of us. And I work with rural communities, and I was wondering if you have, is there a template online on how the process is, like a step-by-step for the process, and where we can find that?
I thought, because part of this was actually, I went back to school after my sister passed away and I finished my master's, and I was thinking about doing a toolkit, but the project itself was just so much more immense than I anticipated that I just wrote a short thesis on it that I need to share online, but it's not a step-by-step. It's more of a kind of the rationale and why and how come and talks about the project, but it's not necessarily like a step-by-step. And I think that probably, if I could find the time to do a toolkit for communities, that would be maybe a next year's project, but I don't have anything that exists right now that I've seen. I heard that somebody who was telling me there might be something no, actually it doesn't exist. That was something else. That was actually an anti-suicide prevention thing that the First Nations Health Authority just put out. That was a toolkit, but yeah, totally different, but similar.
I have a question for you, Melina. You do a lot of traveling and discussion with environmental movement in Europe and the US as well, and this is the question no one really wants to talk about. With Trump getting elected, how does it affect organizing in Canada with the environmental movement and the kind of pipeline politics now, given the state?
Yeah, I mean, we still have yet to see. I think people are still in a state of shock in America right now. That's what I've noticed. I just came back from Cali. And yeah, I think people are still pretty what to do next, and really how serious is Trump about like passing or repassing the Keystone XL pipeline, say, which is a campaign a lot of us worked on for like 5 years. I testified before U.S. Congress against the KXL pipeline in Washington, and I think it's two things. One thing is that it's actually interesting because it rallies people. You kind of like Harper, it like kind of rallied people to work together in a better way. Whereas with Trudeau government, people are like, oh, we don't know how to work with him, so we're going to work with him this way. Other people are, we're going to work with him this way. So it kind of fractures the environmental movement to a certain extent when you don't know who your quote unquote enemy is. I wouldn't say it that way, but one of the things is that with the environmental movement in Canada, when Trudeau came into power, a lot of Americans were like, oh, everything's fine. You know, like the KXL is dead, tar sands is somehow going to just go away. And it's not. Like the Alberta government just approved 3 mines last month. So tar sands, just because the KXL was opposed at that border, doesn't mean there's 4 other pipelines that can be built. And so I think what happened, just so for folks that, you know, this is kind of more not as interesting if you don't work in the environmental movement, but like a lot of the funding for environmental organizations in Canada actually dried up because a lot of the funding came from the US because they didn't want to see climate change happening and they see Canada as a climate laggard. A lot of that funding dried up, and so it's like really reduced the capacity on the environmental movement to actually continue the work. And so it's actually kind of created this weird kind of like vacuum, in my opinion, of the inability for people to do work because grassroots communities and organizations lost funding and things like that. So I think it's with Trump now and maybe the reapproval of the KXL pipeline, you know, we might have to work again with American folks to try to stop that again. And so I think, you know, people stopped across the border, stopped kind of working in the environmental movement and kind of just focused on the like local things. But people might have to actually work together again. So with Trump coming in, it's kind of a scary thing because you don't really know what he's going to do. He released that 100-point plan, and like, how many of that is he actually going to do? Is he going to really do all 100 of them, or is he going to do like 5? So it's hard to tell really what's going to happen. And I would say in the new year, it's going to become really clear, much more clear.
Got time for 2 or 3 more questions if there are any.
Can't believe you brought up Trump. Just joking. Just everyone's so sad now. We're just going to walk away and be like depressed.
Just thank you again for your presentation and information and your long-term commitment. Just wondering about how you're working with other First Nations like the Tsuk First Nation, other solar projects across the continent, and how there might be provincial differences in policy and application, and how you're maybe coordinating or strategizing, and how others of us in the community might help support your advocacy and work. So.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we did, I don't know if folks saw, earlier this year with this, we've had a long-term relationship with Tsleil-Waututh First Nation, which is just over there, that's opposing the Kinder Morgan pipeline. And a couple of organizations, we've donated solar panels to the community to actually implement in their new community building. And so trying to do things like that, trying to support communities that are in opposition but also want to see solutions in their community. So we're able to donate, $10,000 worth of panels to get up onto their community center. And then also another community that is opposing the Energy East pipeline. I'm working with, I don't know if folks know Ellen Gabriel, but in the Oka crisis, which was huge, it's kind of like a standing rock in the 90s for folks that don't know. When the military came out against their community, they're opposing the Energy East now. So have been in discussions about trying to put up solar project in her community and in the Mohawk community there. And so Jane Fund has given me some more money, which is not much, but it's still $10,000. So that's really helpful to try to. But it's hard because the funding. Solar panels are so much less expensive than they used to be. They've gone down like 99% since 1977, so they're a lot more economically viable to have in communities, but that doesn't mean they don't cost money. So it's just, for me, it's like this new era of trying to figure out how to do fundraising, which I've always kind of like, for me, money's been a really dirty word, and I've always tried to stay away from it, so I'm like trying to like figure out how to find funds to put into communities is kind of a newer thing for me, specifically for solar. So yeah, it's trying to find the right funding pockets, and so trying to find people in places like came back from San Francisco and was talking to the executive director from the Leonardo DiCaprio Foundation, and they actually gave $3.5 million to solarize communities in the Amazon. And so I was like, why don't you do that in the tar sands? He's been there before, and he knows what's going on, and he's put that in his latest film. So hopefully things like that can happen in the future, where we can actually access funding to actually benefit communities that, in my opinion, should receive this type of technology first.
Just to branch off that, how much does it cost, like, for one average solar panel? Just
for an average one, so for our solar panels, you saw they were quite big. So those are 260 watts. So that's a really big panel. So those ones cost over $200 each. So it's not too bad, and there's 80 panels, so that's thousands of dollars, and so that's just for the panels. The thing with the panels is that with the panels you need the racking, and then you need the cabling. And the cabling is actually really expensive too, because especially from where we're from, we had to buy like the most expensive kind of cabling because it needed to sustain minus 40-degree weather and go underneath the ground and like drilling and trying to like create drilling down so we could bury them underground so people wouldn't kind of like play with them, so things like that. And so for a panel they're about 200. I would say that's like low end. They could be more expensive, and then you can buy smaller ones that are 150 watts as well, so those would be less expensive. So it just depends on like the array that you design. So we kind of designed that array from scratch, and we wanted it atop a pole mount system, so that's why they stand so high, because we didn't want to fence it off from the community. We wanted people to actually go and walk around and like look at them and stuff, but we wanted them high enough up that kids wouldn't want to climb and like slide down them, because they do look like slides to kids. I would be totally down to slide on those, but they're high voltage, so it's dangerous. So that's why we put them so high up. But those poles in themselves cost like $11,000 because they're stainless steel, like heavy. They're 1,000 pounds each, and the reason why we had to get them that big and thick is because we need to make sure that they sustained 150 kilometer winds, because when we get storms, we don't want them to be blowing away, because that's really dangerous. And a community, well, the reason why I learned that and was aware of it is because a community in Saskatchewan where it's really windy as well, like basically their solar panels like blew over because they didn't engineer it enough to make sure that they could sustain really intense weather.
Are you sure? Yeah. Okay, because this is actually just to follow on, and since you just said you don't like talking about money, I was actually hesitant, but since you opened the floodgate, thanks. I
don't like to. I just think it's like the root of all evil. Just joking. I'm not joking.
It is, but so
energy.
I was just wondering what the sort of the range for, and obviously I understand there's so many different variables. Every project's different. Every community's needs are different. But like, do you have a sense of what the ballpark kind of set of ranges for a project like this tends to be? Like,
well, it depends.
Given everything.
Yeah. Well, you mean like the price?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then also in terms of like maintenance, because I know there's not a ton after that, but there's something, right?
Yes. And that's what I actually need to fundraise for, to develop a maintenance program, because I'm not always there to kind of to troubleshoot. But it really depends on the capacity and the needs of the building. So for our building, we produce about 90% of the electricity on like a good summer day. So in the wintertime, we're not going to be always producing the amount of capacity that we need for that building. But then on the weekends, say we're going to be actually producing excess amount of energy, so it goes into the grid, and then we get a payback, we get a credit. So that actually saves the community money overall. But so we're actually getting like these credits where like in Souk, the the meter spins backwards because they have so many panels up. Whereas us, we kind of spin it a little bit backwards to 90, about 90%. So that 20.8 kilowatts, so that's about 80 panels of a 260 watt panel each. So 80 panels, that cost, the whole project when it was all said and done was probably around 90,000. But that's a big project, and the top of pole mount system, all of that was more expensive because, like I said, those poles alone were expensive. If you wanted to gate it off from the community, but then you have to pay for gating, and so if you have a ground-mounted system, which are cheaper, or you can have a roof-mounted system, but in our community, we couldn't have a roof-mounted system because we don't have we don't have a roof to hold 80 panels, and also the roofs are kind of crap because the housing is poor, and so that's why we decided to have a standalone system, and so it just cost us more, but that was, for me, it was better because we can put a garden underneath, a community garden, and start bringing gardening back, because a lot of our grandparents had gardens. Like my Muslim and Cookham, my grandparents had garden. So we don't have that anymore. A lot of people are so dependent on driving 2 hours to the grocery store. So it costs us about that much, but it could be cheaper. A project like that, a different project, a different array and iteration could be definitely cheaper. But we were able to get like 30% off. And there's also inverters that you have to connect the system to, which changes it from direct energy to direct current to alternating current. So there's all those kind of considerations where it's just like the solar equipment's actually more expensive than I thought it was going to be. But we fundraised about 65,000 of it. So the nation paid the rest of it to like hire the workers. So then the workers were actually getting paid that were from the community to learn and things like that, and provide meals, because who wants to drive like 2 hours, or so just things like that kind of like the shortfall that I couldn't. I tried my darndest and had support and help to do the 65,000, but that was like within that year I was like, okay, and they said that they wanted to have it, so we just went for it.
Last question right here.
So when we're conceptualizing what an alternative world can look like, we think of these projects as being very transformative, not only just like in how you can deliver energy, but perhaps the ways in which community building can take place. And I'm not trying to make assumptions about what happens in your community, but have you noticed any ways in which community has transformed through this project, in ways that are maybe more about how people are thinking about the world, thinking about the community, and thinking about like their participation within the community?
Mm-hmm. Well, for me, I think the most transformation will be from the young people, because I think the young people will consider different career paths. And for me, that's a really great thing. So if they think about being an electrician or a master electrician, so in the future they can do a trade that's actually installing solar. Or we can take, another thing I want to do is take youth from our community that did the installation and bring them to other communities where we're doing future installations and kind of continue to train them. So for me, it's about, I think that's kind of the impact, but I think overall, as a whole, people see the solar projects now generating energy. So I think a lot has been told and imposed on our communities that you're stuck in a rock and a hard place. And this is what the leadership said to me probably like 8 years ago, when I was like approaching them and being like, we can't always have resource extraction happening, and they're like, what do you want us to do? They're the only jobs in the community, all these things. This isn't my leadership. It was actually other First Nation leadership in other parts of Alberta that have a lot of contracts and agreements with industry. And I was like, well, there is the possibility of having renewables, but this was like 8 years ago. Fast forward to now, where it's a lot more possible, because even within the past 5 years, the price of solar has dropped. And the good thing about Alberta is that we're actually one of the sunniest provinces in the country, and so we actually have immense amount of sunlight hours, compared to like places like Germany that has a booming solar industry and has like very few sunlight hours. I'm going to cough. Where's my water bottle? So I think honestly it is going to have an impact long term, but I think it's really going to be the long term impact that I'm really looking for, that those youth in the school that are students right now will be able to envision even a better future than I've envisioned for them.
Just want to say thank you so much, Melina. It's so great to be around an inspiring activist like you, and hopefully you can stick around for another 10 minutes if people have any questions you want to get in conversation with. But thank you.
Thank you.